Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I want to share with you a story about the most amazing man I ever met, my father, Nesanel Gantz, who passed away a year ago. My father was the most incredible, selfless person. He was always doing for others. He was the biggest Baal Chesed. Around the block that I grew up, everyone knew, your refrigerator is broken, you need to wire the electricity in your house, just call Meir and he'll take care of it. And he generally did. The third night of Shiva, my father's friend Avi comes over to my sister and myself and says, I want to share with you a story about your father I don't think you ever heard before. And this is what he said. He said, you know your father's friend Shlomo? I said, sure. They've been good friends for over 30 years. Avi said, your father used to own a sweater factory, as you know. My father used to produce sweaters for high-end department stores. But before that, your father was what's called a master sweater cutter. Today, obviously, that talent is not so necessary. But back then, the sweaters used to arrive in big blocks, and the master cutter would navigate the sweaters by the rotating knives. It was a dangerous and talented job, and your father was excellent at it. One day, someone from the Israeli Minyan approaches your father and says, Meir, I have a friend of mine, Shlomo, who just came from Eretz Yisrael. Maybe you could help him find a job. And your father said, sure. Now, your father didn't even know this guy who came over to him. But the guy knew that if you need help, just go to Meir. Your father went to Shlomo and told him like this, I don't really know of a job for you. I wish I could help you. But I know how to cut sweaters. I'll teach it to you, and maybe you could find a job that way. For the next 3 weeks, after work, your father spent many hours on his own time teaching Shlomo how to cut sweaters, which was a very valuable trade at the time. After a few weeks, your father approached the head of the factory and said to him, you know, I know a young guy, his name is Shlomo, he just came from Eretz Yisrael. He's a really talented cutter. I think you should hire him. We could use the extra work, and he's great. Of course, he didn't tell him that he trained him in. And the guy hired Shlomo. So in the end, my father did get him a job. Fast forward a few years later, and the factory fell in hard times. And your father realized that the factory can't keep both Shlomo and him. They simply don't have enough work for 2 cutters. Without telling anyone, your father went over to the head of the factory and said to him like this, I'm sorry, but I heard you've fallen on tough times. And I know you can't afford to keep both Shlomo and myself. He's a young guy. He just came from Eretz Yisrael. He really needs the parnasa. Let him keep his job, and I'll go find something else. And your father gave up his job for someone else. He was unemployed for several months. Who does that? Who gives up their job for someone else? And Avi started to cry, and so did I. The next night, Shlomo came to be Menachem Aval. And Shlomo said, you know, your father was very close to me. And I said to him, look, I want to share with you a story that Avi said to me the night before. And I know you're close friends with my father, so it's okay if I tell it to you. Can you verify this story? And I shared with him this story that Avi said that my father gave up his job for him. Shlomo, after I told him the story, just looked down, shook his head, and started to cry. He couldn't speak. I said, what happened? He said, I want to tell you something. I always wondered, I never understood why the owner of that factory gave the job to me and not your father. He was the master cutter. He was the pro. I was a novice. I always wondered why I kept the job. And now I knew your father gave up his job for me. And I want to tell you something else. Your father and I were friends for over 30 years. He never told me what he did for me. He never told me that he gave up his job for me. That's who my father was. He was the most selfless person, always doing for someone else, always thinking about someone else. He always said, hey, maybe this person's a good shidduch for that person. Always thinking how to help somebody. I've been very fortunate to be involved in Yad L'Achim for over 10 years. And a few years ago, I came up with the idea of Tu B'Av together. On Tu B'Av, let's get together all of Klal Yisrael and daven for one another for shidduchim. And with Siyata D'Shmaya, the Gedolei Yisrael encouraged the idea, and they liked it, and they said, sure, it's a great idea, let's get Klal Yisrael together. So this year, for a few years already, on Tu B'Av, people are getting together to say Tehillim for one another. And if I could ask, let's try to emulate what my father did, but in our own way. Now, of course, it's not easy to always think about someone else. We're very busy, we're very hectic. But on Tu B'Av, we can take a few minutes and think about somebody else and daven for someone else. But might I suggest something else? You know, someone who's going through a tough time at Sarah, and they're feeling lonely, they're feeling alone. So of course, davening for them is important. But also tell them that you're thinking about them. On Tu B'Av, call your friend who's single or relative, say, today was Tu B'Av together, and I davened for you, I had you in mind. You can also go to our website, tuba'avtogether.com, and you can submit your names for free to a minyan of Talmidei Chachamim who will be in Amukah on Tu B'Av to daven for all who submit their names. All names will also be given to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So call your friend and tell them, I gave you your names for tefillah. One of the most heartfelt emails we received last year was when somebody wrote to us and said, I just want to share with you. I was 28, and I felt very alone that nobody cares about me. And my friend called me up and said, I gave your name into daven on tuba'avtogether.com for the minyan Amukah. And I felt so good of myself, I haven't felt so good in years, that somebody thinks about me. So let's take a few minutes on Tu B'Av and let's daven for one another. It's called Tu B'Av together. We're really all getting together. We're united. Many countries around the world have already registered, and they're saying it. Wherever you are, just take the few moments. If you want to know what the Tehillims are, go to tuba'avtogether.com and you can download it. And let's think about somebody else for a few minutes a day. It makes the world to them. It takes a few minutes to us. And this Tu B'Av, let's all get together. Let's make it Tu B'Av together. On Friday, August 16th, Tu B'Av, join over 500,000 Jews from across the world uniting together for Shidduchim. To find out more about this special project, please visit tuba'avtogether.com. At tuba'avtogether.com, you can watch many more inspirational videos, download the Tehillim to be said on Tu B'Av Together, and submit your names for tefillah for absolutely free. Please share this video with friends and family, and let's make it Tu B'Av together.